Dialogue Saw, my tribe, and welcome to the Modern Barbarian Podcast. May your days be filled with victory, and your nights filled with cold drinks and warm companions. Today's episode is entitled No More True Heroes, and is a discussion of what passes for a hero in the modern age. Modern day heroes do not meet the standards for a true hero. The title is handed out for non heroic deeds. The definition of a true hero is a real person who, in the face of danger, combats adversity through feats of ingenuity, courage, and strength. True heroes are no longer recognized for their actions as heroes because it doesn't meet the modern narrative. What passes for a modern day hero? Victims. Look at who is touted as heroes in today's age: David Hogg, Greta Thunberg, or anyone who survives a mass shooting, pouts on TV about social inequality or global warming. Even the people who continued to work during the COVID crisis are called heroes. What feat of ingenuity, courage, or strength did they perform? What danger did they actually face and not just hide from? What adversity did they overcome? Do we call the survivors of natural disasters heroes? What makes these people so special to have earned that title in the eyes of modern day America? For this all to make sense, we need to juxtapose true heroes versus the modern hero. What a true hero really is versus what passes for a hero in today's day and age. By setting these two examples side by side, I think you'll be able to see that a real hero is something very different than what is called a hero in today's time. A real hero, they do exist in today's time, but they're not who is recognized as a hero in modern times. So to discuss this, let's take a look at what a true hero is. There's a few things that we need to go over. So, one, true heroes rarely work alone. Most heroes are part of a tribe and perform their heroic deeds to defend their tribe. You'll see this with people in the military, especially. They're very tribal to their branch, their unit, even more so. And the heroes that you see that fall from the military are the ones that were trying to defend their friends, their tribe mates, the people they cared about. They weren't a standalone hero out to conquer the world, and they weren't fighting for human rights or freedom or any of these terms that get thrown around today that people say heroes fight for. What they're actually fighting for is their tribe. What they want to do is defend the people they are in combat with. Now, they may have signed up for combat to, fight for freedom or defend the country or whatever it is that they signed up for. But once they're actually in the thick of it, once they're actually in the suck, what they care about is keeping their friends alive. They fight for the man to their left and to their right. And when you see a hero, an ordinary man who's able to perform some extraordinary deed, it's done because he cares about his tribe mates there fighting with him. He puts them before himself and puts his own life on the line to defend these people because they mean more to him than his own life does. So that's why true heroes rarely work alone. To face what you have to face and to do what you have to do to be a true hero, you have to have something more there than the quest for fame or glory. You have to have something driving you more than just some abstract term that you think you're defending. Most true heroes are born out of love. They're born out of caring for their fellow tribe mates and willing to put their own ass on the line to save those people. But let's go back to the definition of a true hero. A true hero is a real person who, in the face of danger, combats adversity through feats of ingenuity, courage, or strength. You'll recognize two of those terms, courage and strength. We know about those. We've done detailed episodes about courage and strength, but we'll cover them briefly in the sense of talking about heroes here. Well, there's a new term here that we have not discussed, and that's ingenuity, which is the quality of being clever, original, and inventive. Now, the reason this is important is there are many heroes who, at the time of their heroic act, may not have been overly courageous or overly strong. They may have had to overcome this adversity. Well, let me rephrase that. They were definitely courageous, but besides that, they had to overcome this adversity through some other means than just strength. They had to figure out how to do something that nobody else had possibly ever done before, or outsmart somebody in a different way to be able to save people, or come about the problem from a different perspective, a different angle. And that's why that's so important to a hero, and why you don't see that in everyday life so much. It takes the ability to think outside the box sometimes. It takes the ability to come up with a plan that gets around an obstacle instead of through an obstacle. We all know that heroes have to have courage as well. And as we have discussed courage in detail, I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, as I want to save some time in this episode for some historic examples of what a hero is. Get into that a little bit. I think that'll help understand it a little bit better. But heroic courage is courage on a higher plane, a higher scale than what you see in most people when we talk about courage. Heroic courage is almost a disdain for their own life in service to the lives of others. They put people that they care about higher on the pedestal than they do themselves. Their own life is not as important to them as the lives of others. And that's a very rare quality. Very rare quality. You will not find that in many people, which is why heroes are so rare. We also know that heroes need strength. And we've discussed all the forms of strength before. There's more to it than just physical strength, though that's important. Most heroes that you find, most true heroes that you find, will display physical strength in some form. But they'll also have mental strength that goes with the courage to figure out how to fight this problem, how to overcome it. So we'll set these three terms as the bar for what a true hero is. We will look at some historic examples, and then we'll go over why I believe that they showed ingenuity, courage, and strength based upon what they did in history and what their intents and goals were. Now, some of these heroes you may recognize from some modern media, but the stories that they tell in the movies and on TV shows are blown out of proportion and made to sell, not made to tell why these people were true heroes. I want to take a few minutes for each one and give you some background on these heroes as to why I believe they are heroes, again, based on the history. So our first one will be Spartacus. Spartacus is technically a barbarian. The Thrace was the country he was from. Thracians were considered barbarians to the Romans. They were one of the tribes outside of Rome who Rome attempted to conquer and enslave. He was captured and enslaved by the Roman Empire in his late teens, early 20s, adulthood, but young adulthood. He was forced to be a gladiator, that is true, trained in gladiator arts, and became a famous gladiator, well known enough that we know that he was a gladiator. Now, This has been fantasized a little bit in modern media that he was some kind of outlandish champion of gladiators and that people all over Rome knew who he was before his revolt. We don't have much history to back that up. But we do know that he was a gladiator. And we do know that he survived being a gladiator for many years, so that he was probably quite good at it. But that's not why he's a hero. Being forced to kill in slavery to survive does not make a hero. What he's a hero for was leading the Third Servile War against the Empire. So, anytime Rome had a uprising, they called it a servile war, when the slaves would rise up and fight against the empire trying to gain their freedom. And it's important to note that they weren't necessarily fighting to free all slaves in the empire. They were only trying to gain their freedom. So that you need to know that when you look at their actions and their tactics, you do a little research on them. Nobody at the time believed that they could end slavery. Slavery was a norm of all human life on the planet at that point. Not so much that everybody owned slaves or agreed with slavery. It was just such a common practice by especially the Romans that the barbarians didn't think they would ever get Rome to quit having slaves and didn't really care what Rome did as long as it wasn't to them, because they were very tribally minded. But that's important to realize with Spartacus, because while his intention was not to free slaves from Rome, his intention was to gain his freedom and possibly carve out some territory for himself later on. He wound up recruiting over 70,000 slaves and other peoples from the empire, mostly slaves who left, and mostly rural slaves. Because at the time, the city slaves, they called them, or we call them now, were deemed to be much softer. They didn't think they could handle the life on the road and the life of a rebel. So they tended to steer away from the major cities during recruiting. They would take over small farms, free all the slaves there, let those that wanted to join them, let the rest go. But that was their target, because they knew that the slaves that lived out in the countryside would be used to a life much harder than the slaves in the city, and would be able to take to this revolt much better. So, after mustering some 70,000 slaves for the Third Servile War, he had to teach this army to fight while keeping them alive. So somehow, on the run, he managed to keep enough food for 70,000 people coming in, train all these people how to become some form of usable army, and fight back against the Roman legions. And he did all this for 2 years. It's only 70,000 men against the entirety of the Roman army. And he didn't have 70,000 at first. At first he had far, far less. That was the highest he ever got to. And still, for 2 years, he managed to hold off the might of the Roman Empire. What finally did him in was betrayal. He had taken his army of freed slaves south and was going to get on some boats that these pirates ran and flee across the ocean to a territory outside of Rome. The goal being that he would save all these people and they could get out, no longer be slaves, and go on and live happy lives. However, the pirates who ran these boats betrayed them. They took the money, then took all their boats and left Spartacus and his army stranded at the southern edge of the Roman Empire. So Spartacus had to turn north. They that tried to build their own boats. Didn't work out. And he turns north and he tries to escape a different way. Here, this is where things start to fall apart for him. Because he had fought so hard to get down to the south, that was his plan, that having to change directions messed with the morale of the army. People started to get, well, the discipline started to break down. And when the discipline breaks down in any army, things start to get much more difficult. And over the next several months, as they headed north, trying to find a new way out, they were engaged many times. The army started to fracture, and they were eventually overcome, and many of them killed in the final battle. Some 6,000 slaves out of that were recaptured, but none of them were allowed to go back into slavery and live. The Romans crucified all the captured slaves, every single one of them, and put crosses all along the streets through the empire, different places. Somewhere in the region of Capua, they lined a street with crucified slaves. So 6,000 people were murdered by the empire, hung on crosses, and displayed as a way to dissuade more slaves from ever wanting to take up arms for their freedom. Spartacus's body was never found. So many historians believe that it's possible he could have gotten away. Well, most historians believe that he died in battle, but because the body was never found, they said it's possible that he got away and lived on. But we never hear anything else about him in history. No more revolts, no more stuff. So my personal belief, and what I think is the most likely scenario based on the history and based upon his history, was that he gave his life there on the battlefield for his tribe. He did everything he could to get as many people free and away as he could that were in his tribe. So now that you know a little bit of the history, let's take a look at whether Spartacus meets the 3 criteria of a true hero. Well, obviously he had courage. He escaped to begin with. He managed to raise an entire army and train them, and then fought the Roman Empire for 2 years with only 70,000 men. That takes courage. Obviously he had strength. Not only was he physically strong himself to be able to escape himself and survive slavery as a gladiator, but then he built up tribal strength. He built an army of 70,000 people, taught them to fight, taught them what freedom meant, and got them almost to freedom before he was betrayed by some underhanded people. So we know that he had strength in multiple ways. Now let's look at the ingenuity. Was he clever, original, and inventive? Well, he outsmarted Roman legions for 2 years. He found a way to feed up to 70,000 people in the wilds of the Roman Empire. And he managed to, for the first time, really, train a full army of freed slaves. That had never really been done before in any of the servile wars. They had uprised and fought back and stuff like that, but this is the first time there was ever a truly dedicated effort at training an army from the freed slaves. It's also the first time that they had ever focused their recruiting efforts on a specific area, thinking that the slaves that they could free in that area would best suit the army. Which, while maybe not as noble as freeing all the slaves in the empire, was definitely an original take on building a freed slave army. So yes, Spartacus does meet the 3 criteria of a true hero. Our next historical hero is King Leonidas of the Spartans. He's the Greek king who held off the Persian army with only 300 men. Now, this has been overdone again, much like Spartacus' story, all throughout the media. But let's look at what we know to be true from the history. And so you guys can learn the real history, and then we'll take a look at whether or not we think he meets the three criteria. What really happened was Leonidas had a brilliant strategy for taking on a much larger force. He funneled them into a very narrow field of battle, thereby eliminating much of the larger force's advantage. With well trained troops and a huge amount of courage, a small group of Spartans and a few thousand Greek volunteers held off millions of invaders for days. Now, that's an estimated number. The historians in Greece said that there were millions. That may be an exaggeration. There may have only been hundreds of thousands. But compared to the size of an army that Greece had ever had and ever seen, hundreds of thousands of men might as well have been millions. They were used to dealing in like tens of thousands. So they funneled them into this very narrow battlefield, and this small group of Spartans and Greeks, and all volunteers, held off this giant force for 48 hours before they were betrayed. They were done in by treachery, as a traitorous Greek showed the Persians how to bypass the battlefield in Thermopylae and surround the Spartans. When this happened, this is where Leonidas' true ingenuity comes in. He tricks the Persians into believing that there's still a battle to be had. He sends away most of the army so that they will still be there for when the real battle will happen with the Persian army at a later date in Greece, knowing that this was a loss. He kept only 300 people there, mostly Spartans, but some of the other Greeks volunteered as well. And they fought to the death to give the rest of the men time to escape and tell all of Greece what was coming. Now, this allowed the rest of the Greek armies to prepare and to eventually beat the Persians. The final blow actually came from Athens. The Athenian navy beat the Persian navy, which was vital to the Persians for feeding the troops, moving the troops, keeping the army going. So losing their navy was the devastating blow that mostly ended the war. But that couldn't have happened without the Battle of Thermopylae. Athens would not have been prepared for the Persian invasion had Leonidas' 300 men not allowed most of the army to escape to be fresh and fight another day, and also spread the word of what was coming. So let's look at the three traits again: ingenuity, courage, and strength, and see if Leonidas meets these three characteristics of a true hero. Well, we know that all the Spartans were strong, but Leonidas was known to have been one of the strongest. Obviously, he had courage. He stood and fought a superior force to the death. But ingenuity being the wild card here, let's take a look at where I believe his ingenuity led to the victory of Greece. Him having the forethought to know that the battle was lost, that most of the army needed to survive to go and spread the word throughout the rest of Greece so that all of Greece could prepare for this invasion, made possible a Greek victory. It would not have been possible without this forethought from Leonidas. So he kept back a small force, small enough to not hurt the future outcome of the army, but large enough to make the Persians still have to engage the force. That was a very delicate balance. Quite a bit of originality and cleverness was needed there. And then, by standing and fighting to the death, the sacrifice of those 300 men allowed thousands of men to live and spread the word through all of Greece. This word being spread allowed all of the Greek armies to come together and prepare to fight this massive Persian onslaught, and eventually led to a victory. So yes, Leonidas does display all three characteristics of a true hero. Our third and final historical example will be something a little bit more close to our time, not so far back in history. This will be Carlos Hathcock and his spotter, John Roland Burke. Now, Carlos Hathcock is a famous Marine sniper. Many of you may have heard some of his stories before. but he was actually the father of modern sniping. The way he went about things and did things is the reason snipers today do what they do. And while Carlos Hathcock is the more well known of the duo, his spotter, John Roland Burke, was every bit the hero that he was. Carlos had 93 confirmed kills, most with his spotter as a team. The ingenuity is kind of the biggest part of the White Feather. That's Carlos Hathcock's name given to him by the North Vietnamese army. It was the biggest part of his arsenal. He outsmarted their snipers and armies at every turn. To discuss it, let's just talk about his most famous encounter, where he shot another sniper through the scope. Now, this was a Vietnamese sniper known as the Cobra, and he had many, many kills of Marines in Vietnam. So they sent in Carlos as a counter sniper. Need you to go in, find the Cobra, take him out, because he's doing serious damage to the morale of the men and to the army itself. So he's out hunting this guy, him and his spotter, and they realize that they're engaged with him. It never says in the books that I've read about it how he knew that the Cobra was there, but somehow he knew that the Cobra was there and started looking around and finds some idea of where he thinks he is. Now, he's not for sure, though. He only thinks he knows where he's at. So he does something pretty ingenious here, and he slowly stalks and circles the area that he thinks the enemy sniper is at, and gets the sun to his back or the enemy sniper's face. Now, this is before they had fancy kill flashes and stuff on scopes. That's one of the reasons that they exist. And he was able to get the sniper to track him as he was stalking around and point his rifle towards the sun. Now, this enemy sniper, the Cobra, not knowing about this reflection, gives away his position by the glint off the glass on the front of his scope. The sun reflects off of it, and Carlos is able to use that, and him and his spotter get all dialed in, and they shoot the glint. This puts the bullet, because he was very good at his job, the bullet actually travels straight through the scope into the enemy sniper and kills him. Now, this bit of ingenuity has labeled Carlos as kind of a myth among snipers, to make the shot where you shoot the enemy sniper through the scope. It's seen in a lot of modern media with snipers in it as the ultimate shot, right? But this is the first time you see it, and this is true. History being better than art most times. So, by doing this, Carlos has saved hundreds, if not thousands, of Marine lives. He's taken out one of the enemy's greatest snipers, increased the morale of the troops because this sniper is no longer out there to harass them. And this isn't the only time that he did something great to boost the morale of the troops, but we'll just stick with this one. And so, because he's taken them out, he's made everybody else safer. Now, there's a whole lot more to Carlos Hathcock's story than I could ever have time to tell you in this podcast. I could do an entire episode on the man and not even come close to doing due diligence. But if you want to know more about him, there's a lot of really good books out there. And my favorite was known as One Shot, One Kill. That's the title. It's a really, really good book on the subject. Goes into many of the most famous engagements of Carlos Hathcock, how he developed modern sniping pretty much on his own, some of the craziest stuff he did. Like, he had the record for the longest shot for a really long time, made with an open bolt 50 caliber machine gun that he had scope custom attached to, and would single load it and fire it one at a time to make these just crazy long shots. Just lots of ingenuity. So let's go and let's cover the three characteristics of the true hero, and let's see if we think that Carlos meets those. We got ingenuity, courage, and strength. So, Carlos and his spotter, as a team, we're going to review them. Obviously, the whole time I've been talking about his ingenuity, so we know he had ingenuity. He developed a whole new way of fighting. What about strength? Does sniping, in the modern term, take much strength? Well, he had to hike his gear in and his food for days at a time, living off the land in the wilderness with just him and his spotter out there alone. So there's a lot of mental strength that has to go into that. The physical strength to get yourself and your gear out there and overcome the elements. So I do believe that he did display strength. Now, strength was not the primary characteristic here. He did not have the same level of strength that you would have seen in somebody like Spartacus or Leonidas. But that's okay. That's why we talk about you need all three characteristics to do this. His primary one being the ingenuity and the courage. The courage was another big one. Two men to go out alone into a jungle halfway across the world that they've never been to before and take on basically an entire army because they don't know what they're going to run into out there and have to deal with all of it, just the two of them, all on their own, takes a huge amount of courage. So yes, Carlos and his spotter, John Roland Burke, both displayed the characteristics of the true hero. And with that, it's time for our commercial break. Before we go, let's remind you, we've been talking about some historical examples of true heroes. And after this quick commercial break, we're going to go over what passes for a hero in the modern age and juxtapose the two, so you can see why I say there are no true heroes left in the modern age. Alright everybody, welcome back from our commercial break. We've been talking about heroes, both true heroes and the modern day version of a hero. Well, cinema has ingrained the idea that heroes work alone and never count on others for help unless there is no other choice. The island of a hero, not the heroic groups of old, such as Odysseus and his men, the Myrmidon, Jason and the Argonauts, the Amazons, the Spartans, the Valkyries, etc. But as can be seen by most historic examples of heroes, this isn't the case. But what about the modern day idea of a hero? What makes up a modern day hero in the media? There's a few key things that a few key points a modern day hero must meet. The first is they must be a victim. Only those who can be called a victim of some action can be called a hero in the modern world. They must have survived a mass shooting or protested against something, been a victim of one of the many isms in the world. And it's sickening to see what heroes have become in the modern world. No longer are the three true heroic virtues what make a hero. Now it's this victim mentality. Who can we find that has survived some event by no doing of their own and tout them around as a hero? They put this word, this label on these survivors, which is what they really are, not heroes, they're survivors, and work them into the political system. Which brings us to our next point. They must be politically liberal. No conservatives that perform heroic actions are noted in mainstream media. You don't ever hear about any of the real heroes in the world today. None of the true heroes. Only those that fit the new modern hero definition, that go along with the narrative, are allowed to be portrayed as heroes in the modern world. Only those who will rail against the evils of conservative or tribal values are called heroes, an attempt to give them some form of false credibility. Why would they need this false credibility? Well, it's pretty simple. they're going to use these people to try and push some agenda. So they find these people that have survived some event or been a victim of some sort, and then they call them a hero for being willing to stand in front of you and tell you about it. Tell you how wrong the world is because they had to experience whatever this was. Notice that, like I said, none of the true heroes in the world are talked about. They can't have true heroes coming in and muddying the waters of what a hero means. They have to redefine the definition. Which we come to the next point with. They must have performed whatever action they performed without the use of traditional masculine qualities. Strength and courage are no longer the qualities of a modern hero. Displaying these traits is considered toxic masculinity and cannot be abided. Just look at Jack Wilson. Do any of you know who that is? That's the man who stopped the Texas church shooting last year. He was a true hero, putting his life on the line to save his tribe. He will never be celebrated in mainstream media because he was a true heroism and not the bastardized version that is accepted today. And above all else, they must be willing to go on TV and proselytize about how what you believe is wrong. Only those that are willing to tell the world that the only way to survive is to change everything will get recognized. They must be willing to take up a banner for some perceived wrong in the world, like the pandemic of gun violence or global warming. So looking at these traits, let's take a look at some heroes that we hear about in the modern world. And let's see if we can find the falsehoods, if you will, and juxtapose the characters of the true hero and the modern hero. So the true hero must have overcome some great adversity through the use of ingenuity, courage, and strength. Whereas the modern hero must be a victim, must be the right political leaning. They must use none of the true heroic traits or any masculine virtues in their survival. And they must be willing to go on TV and tell the world about how they shouldn't have to have done what they did. Now, we've talked about many of the historic heroes, but let's look at some of the people that have been touted around today as the modern hero. You have politicians and you have kids like David Hogue, who survived a school shooting, or Greta Thunberg, who sailed across an ocean on her family's private yacht to come over here and tell you about how evil you are for global warming, about how you're stealing her childhood with global warming. And let's compare these two characters side by side and see why would they change the definition of hero. So you see, we have the traditional true hero. We have the hero who is strong and capable and can think for themselves and is independent. And then you have the new modern hero who is this liberal victim willing to talk about it on TV. Now, why do you think that the definition of hero has changed? Why would they why would the Empire of Nothing intentionally push the definition of hero to this new, disgusting, bastardized version? Well, that's a pretty easy thing once somebody's pointed it out to you. The Empire works on control. Everything they do is about increasing their power while decreasing yours. And if they can change the definition of a hero to a person who takes no action to save themselves and will proselytize the greatness of the new way, the socialism and the victim mentality and cancel culture and all the crap that's going on in the world today, then they can call them a hero and give them credibility in the eyes of a lot of the subjects of the Empire. The Empire says, look at this hero. He has done this great thing. He was able to not die in some attack or go through something or believe something, and now has the courage to stand on television in defiance of the world and tell you why you need to be different. Tell you why your way of life is wrong because he had to go through some hardship and managed to survive it through no actions of his own or her own. So, looking at it from a control perspective, if true heroes are no longer talked about, and only these new modern definitions of a hero are ever allowed to be celebrated, then the person who gains the fame and fortune, the person who gains the glory, is this new character, this new definition of a hero. And so, who do people idolize, right? They idolize their heroes. So by forcing this down, especially into the younger minds of the generation, they show off these new heroes about how great they are and how wonderful they are, how much you should be like them, how they should be your role models. And they find the ones that believe the things they want them to believe and will tell everybody about it on TV, so that as they become the role model, they can start to shape the minds of the younger generations. They start to shape the minds of the American subject. And with this changing, this slow progression to the new hero, you start to see the changes throughout the culture. You start to see people who will say that they're a hero because they went to work when there was a global pandemic. You start to see people who will claim that they're a hero because they've had to deal with adversity because they don't fit a traditional gender role. You'll still see people who claim that they are heroes now because somebody some time ago was mean to them. They got to feel like they were a victim of racism or sexism or any of the other many isms that have become part of the world. And so now all the people who follow this ideology get to feel like heroes. They get to idolize these people, and they feel like they're on the right path because the people that they see being treated as heroes, the people that they see becoming or gaining glory for their actions, are the people that are doing those types of things. If you ever were to see a true hero actually lauded on TV, then that would start to undo that. That's why they can never allow that story to become mainstream. There can be no true heroes in the modern age because it goes against the wishes of the Empire. The Empire must maintain and gain control. That's how the system works. If they ever stop gaining more control, then they stop having the ability to do what it is they want to do. And obviously what they want to do is gain more power, and they do that by having more and more control of your lives. Now, in order to get more control of your lives, they must control the narrative. And this is one of the tools of narrative control. And that's why you see so many new modern heroes, right? The flame of a false hero burns out quickly. People can only listen to some victim rail on about how they were so lucky to survive and the world is so evil and everybody should just sit around the campfire and sing Kumbaya and fucking roast marshmallows, that people get sick of hearing about it. It dies out. It no longer carries the power that they needed to carry. So then they bounce to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. It's why the modern hero doesn't carry any true weight. You won't see histories written about the modern hero. In thousands of years, there will be no stories that people read about these modern hero characters that have been created by the media. But yet, thousands and thousands of years later, we can still read about the true heroes. And that's because true heroism cannot ever die. That will always be there. That will always be what a hero is, no matter what the media tends to portray. You cannot lie your way into changing the truth. Many people believe they can, especially the Empire of Nothing. It believes that if it tells the big enough lie long enough and vehemently enough and with enough passion, that the lie can become the truth. However, it cannot. A lie cannot be truth. It is, by definition, a lie and will never be the truth. So, with that in mind, you can see history of true heroes versus the modern hero. How many of them have they ran across TV screens or talked about on the news and on the radio? And how many of their names do you actually remember? Now think about your favorite true heroes. And how many of their names can you call to mind? That's the power of the true hero. These false heroes, these modern heroes, they will always fall away because they have not actually done anything to gain true credibility. They have not actually done anything worthy of note. There is no glory in what they have done. It is false glory. And false will always fall away. Many of us may never live to see the time when the world rights itself. But as history has shown and is repeated over and over again, the world always rights itself. The righteous, the true hero, the courageous, they always rise to the top. And the false hero, the narcissistics, they will always fall away. To fight this, the Empire will keep parading their false heroes around, showing the subjects of the Empire how great they will make your life if you just fall in line. That's why people like us must do our own searching and find our own heroes. Do not fall for the lies. True heroes do exist. They are out there. You just have to find them for yourselves. You have to shut the news off, shut the media off, do some research on history, and pay attention to what's going on around you from real world stuff, not the entertainment that is, mainstream media. And find true heroes. Tell them that they are heroes. Give the true hero his due diligence. Make that a thing in your life. We don't need the news to tell us who our heroes are. We can choose our heroes for ourselves. When we take that power back from the Empire, when we remove their ability to parade false heroes in our face and affect our mental state with it, we take that power for ourselves and we take it away from them. And that's a dangerous thing for them, but it's a vital thing for the modern barbarian. You must stop listening to the lies of the mainstream media about who a hero is and what a hero is, and find your own heroes and role models. People that you want to be like, people who have earned your respect. And they will probably not be famous people. I've met many people in my time on this earth that I would consider heroes. Many of them will not consider themselves heroes, and which should almost be a sign of a true hero. Anybody you see running around calling themselves a hero most likely is not. People who have done true heroic acts don't feel like they're heroes. They didn't do it to be a hero. They did it because it needed to be done, because they needed to protect their tribe. That was the only reason they did what they did, and they don't really want glory from it. But they deserve it anyway. They deserve our thanks and our admiration, whether they want it or not. And so you find these people in your life and in history, and you learn from them and you look up to them. No longer can you accept the false hero. You must find true heroes to emulate. And with that, we're going to bring this episode to a close. I appreciate all you guys coming in to listen with me, hang out. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And now we're going to go over a few things to help you find me out in some of the rest of the social media world. My primary social media that I'd like to use is called Telegram. If you want to find me on there, you can type into your web bar t.me/Modern Barbarian. That's t.me/Modern Barbarian. I also use some more of the other underground social medias. I'm not on any of the mainstream stuff. I've been kicked off all of it as I was dangerous, according to them. So, there's that. But you can find me on Wimkin by searching @Barbarian. If you use MeWe, you can search for Modern Barbarian. I'm on there as well. And if you're a Parler user, you can find me on there with the @TheModernBarbarian. Also, hope you guys will take the time to subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already. If you have a like feature, like it so that it can like the episodes, you can help us grow. Share it with your friends if you think they'll enjoy it. Anything you can do to help us grow helps the barbarian cause, helps the tribe grow, and possibly can help save what's left of our country. I appreciate your time today, guys, and I really hope you enjoy this episode. Have a good day.